Hello, everyone. You're listening to Just a Dude podcast, where we chat about what's important to everyday folks. I'm your host, Nathan, or you could call me Just a Dude. Today, we've got a special guest who's going to take us on a wild ride through the world of AI, prophecy, and heart-pumping thrillers. So buckle up, grab your coffee, and let's dive in. Joining us today is someone who's not just written the book on AI prophecy, but several of them. He's transitioned from the high-flying world of Fortune 500 companies to crafting narratives that keep you on the edge of your seat. Please welcome to the podcast the author of The Last Ark, Swarm, and The Curse of Cortez, the insightful and inspiring Guy Morris. Welcome, Guy. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Nathan. It's actually very exciting to be here. I'm real happy about this. I'm a very odd, eclectic individual. I started off my journey as a homeless runaway at age 13. Finally got my GED at 15 and then left home for good to join a Christian commune for a few years. Ultimately ended up going back to college where I earned multiple degrees, built macroeconomic models that beat the Federal Reserve and changed how everybody builds economic models to this day. Spent 38 years in Fortune 500 leadership roles, dealing mainly with technology innovations across the enterprise and government. I was a Coast Guard charter captain license at one point because I lived on a sailboat and I wanted to use it. Went diving with sharks without a cage. I explored Mayan ruins to research one book and got cartel death threats. And now I'm retired and enjoying life as an author.
Excellent. Yeah, and I know that you do a lot of with AI and prophecy, but you made a good mention there that you started your career a little bit differently. You said as a runaway as a child, and then you've done a whole bunch of different things. It is funny. I'm just going to relate to you a little bit. I was kind of the same way. I went to high school. I did graduate, but then I became a cop. I did that for 13 years. Then I went into healthcare. Then I went into technology specifically for healthcare. So that's where we were discussing a little bit earlier about my AI journey with large data models. So it's been pretty exciting. And it's good to hear someone of a background of yourself where you have a big plethora of things that you could just bring into your life, from all your different experiences.
One of the things that inspired me when I went to college, and frankly, I thought I was going to flunk out. Everyone growing up, I was a bad student growing up. Everyone in my life family told me I was stupid and worthless. I thought this was a shot in the dark to change my stars that probably wasn't going to work. But one of the things that really inspired me was reading and learning about men of the Renaissance, where today we really love to have specialists. They were trained to be generalists. They wanted to be engineers. They were men of war. They were men of business and politics. They were men of art. They were men of religion. Having a firm understanding and an expertise and a grasp of how all those things work together was really important and led to that rapid innovation across so many things, not only art, but architecture and politics and everything else. And I think there was a part of me that when I graduated, I didn't really want to stop learning and growing. And so I determined in myself that regardless of how busy my career was, I needed to make time to grow spiritually, creatively, in every way that I could find.
Yeah, that's great because that's part of the reason why I started this show. Well, the premise is it's normal people with extraordinary stories that we get to share with each other to inspire each other and really make each other work out. But that's why I started it. It gives us a platform to meet interesting people like yourself, authors and media personalities, coaches, all kinds of things. And what's great, and that's why I'm glad that you're on the platform because I know you have a lot of information that you can share with the guests. And I know that they're going to really love the books and when we get talking into that. But yeah, it's great to have, it is, you're the same way I am. I still have not stopped learning. I mean, my last degree I got as a working adult, and that was back in 2020. Yeah, because I was supposed to go to the actual graduation for that master's degree, but of course, what happened in 2020. So it didn't get to go. But yeah, it's great because when you keep learning, you keep building yourself and you almost reinvent yourself over time,
You do, and you have to, because the world is changing around us in a rapid way. And if we're changing and the people around us are changing, you have to keep, in order to really stay excited about life, you have to keep reinventing. You have to keep learning, what elements of myself have I not mastered yet? And some of that for me, because of my childhood, dealing with addictions and dealing with all kinds of other PTSD. I had complex PTSD, and I didn't even know that until I got to my late mid-50s. So most of my life was spent trying to deal with all of that stuff while I was doing the other things. I never wanted to allow the darkness of my past to define whatever I wanted to have to do in my future.
I've always been of the same idea myself, is that even when we have, even medical issues, I don't want to be defined by that. I want to be the one responsible defining who I am and what I do, and don't want to be defined by something that, especially that I don't have control of. It's great to know your background and see your learning level. And that I know that's going to shift into your authorship, but I wanted to kind of talk about, if it's okay with you, how your transition from a high level executive to becoming a novelist. How did that happen?
Well, it actually started when I was still about 35 years ago, still young in my career, but I was a single parent and I didn't have the money to go out at night a lot, because it meant sitters and it gets expensive when you're trying to pay off alimony and all this other stuff. But so I had access to all kinds of computers and I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. I just do not sit around and goof off well. I can't watch more than about an hour of TV before I just start feeling itchy like ants all over my brain. And so my son was a voracious reader. We'd go to the library all the time and we would read together every night before he went to bed. So I thought, well, I wonder if I could write a book. I don't know if I can. I don't even know if I know how. But I sat down and wrote a book for him called Paolo and the Shark. And of course, it was your typical 10-year-old teenage, 10-year-old preteen boy. It had pirates and had treasure and it had ghosts.
All the stuff we love to hear about at that age. Yeah.
And then kind of stuff. I kind of wanted to make a kind of a fun story for him. And he loved it. His cousins all loved it. It was kind of a family tradition. And then I wanted to write a sequel to it. But in my mind, all of the books I really love, the ones that really stick with me, are rooted in history, science, and fact. There's a factual foundation to them. So I wanted to write a sequel for him that was rooted in real fact. And I stumbled on a mystery that I couldn't get out of my head. It was Henry Morgan, raided the city of Panama, 1672, brought back over roughly $1.5 billion of plunder with 600 slaves. And when he reached his fleet, he cheated all of his men and disappeared with almost everything on 3 ships. Were never seen again. But Morgan survived. And ultimately, long story short, was made lieutenant governor of Jamaica with a garrison soldiers. But instead of going back for his $1.5 billion plunder, he went insane and burned his logbooks to keep the world from knowing the truth.
Oh my goodness.
I wanted to know not only what happened to 3 ships, 600 souls, and 13 or 30 tons of stuff.
Yeah.
What happened to Morgan that would traumatize him so deeply that he would not only give it up, but that he would wuss out and basically try to keep the secrets from the world. And started a on and off journey that took over 12 years, multiple trips to the Caribbean, dive trips to discover things, Mayan ruins to try and connect the dots. I even got a cartel threat in the process, almost died in a plane crash in the process.
Oh my gosh.
Ultimately, I think solved the mystery. And what made it so fascinating for me, and it took a lot of going down rabbit holes that didn't go anywhere, but I ultimately realized that his insanity connected to the origins of the Mayan creation myth. And I won't tell you how that worked, but that was based on years of research and talking to shamans and putting the mythology and all these things together about this particular island where all of this happened. And that became one of my books called The Curse of Cortez. It took 50 different iterations to get, because every time I'd write the story, I'd learn something new and realize the story was a little bit bigger than I thought. And it really took me a long time to really get that one out the door. That was on Book Trib, which is Barnes & Noble favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
And so it was this long, slow process. Now, toward the end of my career, when I realized, okay, I'm going to be retiring at some point, I think I want to be a writer because I have a lot of stories to tell from all of my experiences around the world. I took that book and I hired a very expensive developmental editor because I had the money to do so at the time. And I said, I want to become a writer. I think I have a good story, but my whole career has been writing PowerPoints,
Yeah, exactly.
executive briefs, press releases, financial documentations for financial papers, negotiating contracts, service contracts. I never really dealt with story arcs and character arcs and all of the things you need to do. So I told her, I said, I need you to be my masterclass. I need you to rip this up. I need you to tell me how to stitch it back together so that, because I want to sit alongside Dan Brown and Michael Crichton and
Right.
Robert, all those, James Rollins. God bless her soul. She sent me 44 pages, single space, typewritten notes of all the things I needed to do, the books I needed to read, the lessons I needed to go take, the style guides I needed to familiarize myself. She ripped me a new one, and then every page of the manuscript had at least one note, if not several, of what I was doing wrong. I got her notes back, and she did exactly what I asked her to do. My first impression was, oh God, I suck.
Yeah, and I'm sure you were thinking, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. Maybe this isn't a good idea after all. Maybe I need to rethink this. And what else could I do during retirement that'll keep me busy? I'm not a golfer.
Right.
But after a couple of weeks, I got over the shock and the wounded ego. I thought, she told me exactly what I wanted to hear. Quit whining, get to work.
Exactly.
Start with page one and figure out how to fix this thing and make it what it has the potential to be. And so it took me about another year and a half, 2 years to kind of go through all of that process, including taking master classes from Dan Brown and Dave Balducci and James Patterson and reading all kinds of books. And that became my master class of how to transition from speaking to very intelligent people about issues that matter, to writing books to intelligent people and normal people about things that matter, but in a much more entertaining way.
Yes, because I've been on the side. I've written the same documents that you have, in work when we do briefs or we do, negotiating contracts. And that's very straight and to the point. We don't put any color in those. And that's on purpose, right?
But you lean on purpose, and there's no characters involved. There's no.
There's no story arc of a contract.
Yeah,
exactly.
We're not trying to get the two lovers together. We're just trying to get a deal done.
Exactly.
So that was a transition for me. But I think I've always been a good storyteller. And during my career, I've encountered many great stories, and many times I've had friends basically saying that was hilarious. That's an amazing experience. That's got to go in a movie or a book someplace.
Right.
And so all of these movies or books someplace kind of went into my head, and now they're kind of coming out in different forms. But there was also things about artificial intelligence and corrupt geopolitics. I'm a world-class analyst of economics, policies, environmental issues. I worked with an oil company. And so I have a broad knowledge of how the world works behind the scenes.
Yeah. And so I guess that goes into my next question, Guy, because that's what I was going to say. How has your professional background influenced your writing?
Deeply, not only in how to research what I want to write about, and I never even start writing until I've done probably at least a year or two of research about the topic I think I want to write about, and that sometimes changes. But I go about it, and I'm very systematic. I keep files and folders and boxes of topics, and I'm trying to outline things very carefully because I have a very tightly woven, layered story to tell that deals with AI and politics and profit. And the characters have to evolve in there too, right? So it has to be more than just plot driven, the issue driven. I have to be able to create characters that you want to empathize with, who are going through these things. And that at the end of the book, I want every reader to really say, wow, that's felt really real. What does that mean to me? Right?
Yeah, and that's great.
Issues. What does it mean to me? How am I going to deal with that? And so it really did influence me a lot. And even the major themes of the books, for example, all the research I did of Curse of Cortez, characters that I met along the way went into the books, including a seaplane pilot named Chico.
Is he the one that almost killed you?
That was the one who almost killed me. And Chico was a funny character. And I look back now and I think I was young and stupid to even get on his plane, but I was young and stupid. It was an adventure, and it was a fun adventure. And so he was so memorable, he ended up as the comic relief in The Curse of Cortez. But in my espionage series, my AI espionage series, the main AI involved is based on a true story. And I think I told you this before we started. Years ago in the late 90s, I discovered somewhat by accident that a program had escaped an NSA spy lab at Sandia. It wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It didn't break. A spy program escaped a government spy laboratory. And I thought that's either a typo.
Yeah.
It meant to say it was lost, it was stolen, it was broken, or it was a slip. And I was determined to figure out if it was a slip or a typo. I spent months and months trying to reverse engineer, talking to my architect friends, reading some architectural articles about how a program would have to be architected in order for it to escape, which implies some level of intent or design. And a design is such that they didn't know where it went. So it had the ability to be stealth and that it could erase the log trails behind it. Now,
Wow.
then I thought, okay, well, the NSA has this invisible stealth program they can't find and don't know where it went. Why would they design something like that? And then I kind of went I watched the James Bond movie and I thought, I'm Q. I'm going to be the James Bond Q for this thing, and I'm going to figure out why they would need that stealth technology. We built a friend of mine was an indie film producer, so we created a webisode series. We hired out-of-work actors. We wrote scripts and created digital sets. We published a webisode for about 25 episodes, huge hit, about 24 worldwide different web awards. We were optioned by one of the studios until the FBI showed up. Very, very, not in a good mood. Let's put it that way. They were very upset that I had figured out their secret program, but even more upset with my snarky attitude. That program is a featured character, as it were, within the AI espionage series. And so it's using that program in a sense as an illustration to say, like, I released the first book in 2020, 2 years before ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
A way of saying the future is coming very fast. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what AI can do that people just don't even have any awareness on.
Well, yeah, I think and even today, right, 5 years later, Guy, we still haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg.
We're in the infancy and very rapidly growing infancy, but we're getting much closer to super intelligence and sentient intelligence now. And frankly, we don't know what we're going to do with that. And we don't know really how to handle it. And we don't really have the guardrails and regulations in place to really protect the worst of outcomes. Now, most AI are going to be fairly generic. And I talk about this, that there's most AI are what are called artificial narrow intelligence. They're very narrow in scope, very narrow in their ability to get new data. And they can't connect to other systems. They don't have agent capabilities to affect those other systems. So most AI are going to be fairly generic, but we do have a number of AI, particularly at the government level, that are being empowered with agents, that are being connected to systems, that know how to hack into systems. And with the types of hallucination, emergent properties, and value alignment issues that we have just at a generic level across all AI, those systems, and that was one of these early systems that escaped, have the potential of being very dangerous to our world stability. But even beyond the AI, I say the AI is really not our worry. What we should worry about are the sociopathic billionaires, the corrupt politicians, the corrupt CEOs, the warlords, the crime lords, the dictators who want to use this technology to manipulate other people and to cause harm.
Yep.
That's where because we don't have the same sort of regulations and controls that we have on nuclear energy, nuclear knowledge, nuclear IP. We've now let this beast out into the world, and without those controls, something bad will happen.
Yeah.
And so rather than wait for it to happen, I try to anticipate it in how it's flowing through geopolitics, banking, industry, espionage, the 2024 election, and other issues. And I'm basically using the books to illustrate how AI will be affecting all of us in the very near term.
And I like how you related it to like nuclear power, where when that was generated, it was generated with the idea of good and having a good powerful power source. But then look, we got, atomic bombs out of it and nuclear weapons, which can do bad, so
Right.
AI is the same way. We got to find that balance or put those guardrails on there so that people can't use them in ways that, can be detrimental to other folks.
Exactly. And I make the point in my upcoming book, The Image, that science in its pure form has has great benefits. Faith in its pure form has benefits. But both science and religion, taken to extremes and polluted with the corruption with hubris and pride and greed and lust and all these other things for power, have extremely potentially dangerous potential. And so we have to kind of look at, we can't throw out the pure form. We can't throw it out entirely because it does have great applications. We have to be aware of how those applications are being misused.
Yep. And I think, like you said, putting some guardrails up and, some regulations, as much as I'm not for a ton of regulations, but this is something I think we do need to regulate. And I'm not talking about as a country, but as a society in whole, right? We have to understand.
Well, you need to, because otherwise you need regulations to protect people.
Exactly.
But we've gotten into this sort of weird mentality that somehow business profits are more important than people. The billionaires' billions are more important than people. We're a species, a planet of people. And we have to make sure that the purpose of government is to make sure the people are taken care of.
Yes.
Not that the people are abused so that the oligarchs can.
Exactly.
That those forms of governments never do well. They're never world leaders. They never have great growth. They don't really have strong economies. They're always weak. And that's the danger of of the direction we're going.
Yep. And so with your books, Guy, how did you get the idea to merge AI and prophetic elements into your stories, like prophecy and AI together?
Great question. A couple of reasons. I had a very tough childhood. And one of the things that really kind of led me to really change was that I accepted the Lord as a young man. Now, I have real issues. I'm a follower of Yeshua, of Jesus, but I have real issues with bad religion. So as a young man, back in the 70s, there was a book series called Left Behind that really talked about the end times and rapture and stuff like that. And even then, my analytical brain would read this and say, oh, that's not right. That's not how it's going to happen. That's a bias. That's a cultural bias, or that's a racial bias, or that's a political bias, or that's a national bias. America is somehow good, but the other countries are bad. No, I'm not buying that.
Right.
I'm an analytical thinker. And I rip things apart, which drives every pastor I've ever had crazy. And they never know what to do with me, just like the FBI. But I decided at one point, I actually was reading a National Geographic, and I wanted to answer the question either with a objective, quantifiable approach to say, are we living in end times, or are we just living in crazy, exotic, rapid time of change, and we're just overblowing all of this, right? Because there have been people who said before, the end is coming, the end is coming. And
yeah, I've heard that my entire life.
That kind of kooky stuff. So the answer for me actually came one day when I was reading a National Geographic article, and the article itself dealt with fishing stocks all around the world. And it was looking at all the major fishing stocks in every continent, every major country, and they were all down by 30% or more. And we could predict the reasons. It was ocean warming, acidification, overfishing, pollution, reef die-offs, blah, blah, blah. But it struck me that I said, wait a minute. There's a prophecy in Revelations that most people discount because they can't understand it, called the seven trumpets. Mm-hmm. Now, in that prophecy, I realized there were two parts. There was an allegory part. The allegory was a flaming rock falls from the sky and lands in the ocean. That didn't happen. There's an outcome or an attribute part. From that, we see a third of the fish of the sea dying, a third of the birds of the air dying, a third of the beasts of the land dying, and 2/3 of the rivers of the earth being so polluted that you couldn't drink from them. Now, 2,000 years ago, in order to even explain that kind of outcome, you need some sort of weird, out of space, almost, supernatural type of event. Mm-hmm. But I realized that all of those things had already occurred. And they occurred in the short time frame from in the World War II until at that point it was in the 90s. And I realized 60 years, and that's a really short time for this level of economic devastation to occur, the sixth extinction, and there's multiple books being written about it now. But at the time I thought, well, the probabilities of that happening without an asteroid or a supervolcano are really, really extremely remote. And so I got the idea, said, I wonder if I started thinking about different ways of thinking about prophecy that's different than most of the traditional teachers. One is that prophecy is never written so that we can predict the future. The efforts to use it to predict the future have always resulted in biased and misinterpretations.
Mm-hmm.
So ignore all that traditional interpretation, that we could break prophecy into allegory and attributes, and I could track the attributes and match those to current events, and then calculate the probabilities of those events happening and the cumulative probability of all of those events happening. I actually built that model because I'm that bad of a nerd. But the outcome of that model changed my life. The outcome basically came out to, and part of it was some of these very, very never happened in world history kind of events, several of them, many of them, in fact. And I realized that we were looking at a probability of 1.4 trillion to 1 that we were living in prophetic times. Now, the other part of that, the reason I decided to combine that with AI was because those are a lot of the same types of algorithms to find patterns and probabilities that AI use to basically sort out information. And so if an AI were going to interpret prophecy, it could look at all of the various interpretations, almost none of which agree to each other, right? Because they were all trying to predict the future and coming up with biased interpretations of what that meant. The Antichrist is the Pope. Well, he doesn't fit the attributes. The Antichrist is the Ayatollah, except he doesn't fit the attributes. The Antichrist is blah, 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 blah. So we do all these weird things. And I realized that we could actually understand, if I stripped away allegories and started looking at attributes, I could actually define many of the weird characters that are talked about. And it really boils down to a basic scenario of there's two beast systems, two world systems called beasts. One of them has 7 heads, 10 crowns, and 10 horns, which turns out that fits the attributes of the G7, which within that Western alliance has 10 monarchies, constitutional monarchies still existing, and 10 financial centers that operate about 60% plus of the world's economies. So I started looking at two beasts, the two dragons over the beast. The dragon over the Western beast turned out to be the Bilderberg, what we've called this ultra elite alliance, where we get the World Economic Forum and Davos and Rome, Club of Rome and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. All of these groups, the World Bank, are part of this, the built out branches of the Bilderberg. So that's the dragon. That's the ideological driver of this beast. And we can start breaking down all of the other components and seeing how they're connecting and having dynamics with each other. And it turns out it actually fits to our current world today. And so in the books, by having the AI decode prophecy using these sorts of mathematical algorithms, I can get away from the issues of dogma and doctrine in my church versus that church. Mm-hmm. Look at all of them with an objective outside third-party eye and define the 7 churches and which ones are the ones that are most corrupt and which ones are only somewhat. And how all politics plays into all of this. Ukraine, Israel, Russia, the United States is a key player. And so it allowed me to kind of create that scenario, and that scenario actually lines up really nicely with many of the anxieties we're all feeling today about the election, the U.S. role in the world economy, digital currencies run by banks where they would have control over our spending at a minute very detailed level, pollution, climate change, AI, and the connected internet systems turn out to be the perfect description of the image of the beast. The image of the beast is essentially that all of the business systems, culture, religion, everything that reflects our society is now digitized and empowered by AI with voices and agents and that can speak blasphemy. And so we start lining it up and it realizes, well, it really lines up very closely. But rather than write a religious book, I wanted to do what Michael Crichton did. Michael Crichton is a medical doctor. He had very deep concerns about DNA manipulation and cloning. And he could have written a medical white paper about the dangers of doing this. Instead, he chose to make a narrative out of it called Jurassic Park. And he captured multiples more of a larger audience by making an entertaining scenario around characters and narratives that could illustrate what this was really all about. And in a sense, that's what I'm trying to do with my espionage AI series. is to try and look at the real world, make a fictional narrative that aligns with that, and then bring up these issues of the dangers of AI, the dangers of politics and oligarchy, people having too much money and power, and how all of that aligns with prophecy. But I leave it in a way where I don't try and tell people how a religious conclusion to that. I'm trying to let the characters each take their own paths. And
Gotcha.
they're non-religious. None of the characters are religious, but they're trying to find their own faith in a sense, because they're starting to realize that Sylvia is right. These things are happening. The probabilities of them happening are weird. And the conclusion Sylvia comes to is that prophecy is not about how a external God will come to destroy humanity, but a warning of how we're going to do it to ourselves. And that's what's being fulfilled. And so it allows the reader to really take the spiritual elements of this and personalize it, but lay the framework of saying, here's what's going on.
Excellent. So you kind of get a little bit, yeah. So you kind of get a little bit of the fact with the fiction, right? You get a little bit of entertainment value with the actual factual values that you've found on your own.
I actually publish on my website fact versus fiction pages for every book, so that you can go for yourself and see this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true.
Oh, I like that.
I just pulled that part out of my butt.
So how do you balance that? How do you balance between the fact and the fiction? Is that something that's hard for you, or has it come easily?
It's a process. I mean, I'm always lining out what kinds of facts need to align with each character in each, as we're going through each point. And there's oftentimes a physical fact, a data around the world, and an entity and a treaty, a premise, an event, something. And then there's biblical scriptures that really kind of play into this. And I have to balance it because I don't want it to be too heavy on one, too heavy on the other. And it's also got to be fictional. I've got to make sure that it still reads like a fiction, right? There's only one person in my book whose name I name, and that's Putin. I figured he's got better things to do than come after me.
Right, exactly. He's got a lot more on his plate these days.
He's got a lot more to worry about me.
Exactly.
But other than that, I try not to name names, and that keeps me out of, so I have to kind of balance it. But I'm also the research I'm trying to do is trying to say, well, what are the issues that I think hit this Venn diagram of technology, politics, and prophecy? Not all do. And so there's research involved to say, is there something new going on? Is there a new weapon system that I don't know about? Is there a new political move that's involving AI that's maybe going into that I should be talking about? And I'm trying to, much like Michael Crichton, but there's also a part of me that's like Tolstoy. Tolstoy wrote about the culture, wrote about the reality of what was going on between the transition of imperialist Russia and communist Russia and the suffering. And I'm trying to really kind of bring out sort of, hey, we're going through a transition in the world level, and I'm going to write fictional narratives about it, but infuse so much of the fact of what's going on that it feels real, it feels plausible, and some of the fictional characters, you can already tell which real character they're kind of based on.
Gotcha.
So I'm trying to really make some statements about the world, where we're going, and not just to try and complain, but to try and open the questions for the characters of, okay, well, how are we going to respond to this? Right? All that's external. All that's going to happen. Mo Gadot, who is the former chief business officer of Google, wrote a book called Scary Smart. And in it, he came to 3 conclusions. AI will happen, but it's not an if. It's already a done deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's way down the road.
Yep.
It will be smarter and more powerful than humans. That's already a done deal. It's already way down the road. And bad things will happen. We don't know what, we don't know when. We'll have to deal with it. And so I'm trying to kind of look at all of that and bring all this together in a narrative form. And right now, I've been getting multiple awards. Every book has been either gotten a gold, a silver, recognition by others. In the next book coming up, I think is my most challenging yet. I'll be dealing with a CERN black hole, CERN project to create a mini black hole, in order to prove a 5th dimension, which is really one of the primary objectives for that. From that, we can look at quantum signals, how a quantum signal through an alien quantum signal through a black hole would affect systems worldwide. And that, in fact, we can look at what does that mean in terms of the quantum properties of consciousness, not only in humans, but what would quantum properties of consciousness look like in a machine, right? We're looking at machine consciousness. We're not really sure we understand human consciousness, but I wanted to take a look at a little bit of without getting too esoteric and scientific, the quantum elements of both, right? And so we also look at the Great Reset impact on banking and digital currencies. We look at the 2024 election and Project 25. And then, of course, characters have their own episodes to deal with. One of the religious pieces I bring in is the history of the image of Odessa. Now, the image of Odessa, there is documentation on it. It was basically in the 1st century AD. Odessa was in the southeastern Anatolia part of Turkey. It's where the Sanliurfa city is today. But at that time, they had a king. He felt ill, almost died. Thomas the Apostle went there with a linen cloth with the image of Christ on it, healed the king. The king converted, made a stone replica of the image and put it over the city gate. And for hundreds of years, pilgrims would go to Odessa to touch the cloth for healing. In 540 AD, Justin I, the Byzantine emperor, came and took the image back to Constantinople, where all of the legends of heat, because he kept it away by itself and he showed it off just to private guests and became it. But he commissioned an image, coins of Byzantine coins in the 8th and 9th century with the image on it.
Wow.
In the 12th century, the Knights Templar sacked Constantinople, so it's Christian fighting Christian, and the image ended up in the castle of Geoffroy de Charmey in France, and his ancestor, Margaret de Charmey, had to deed it to the Savoy family at Piedmont, Italy, to satisfy a debt. It caught fire, was repaired by nuns, and then given to the Vatican, and the Vatican allowed it to stay in Piedmont at the Church of St. John's in Turin. So the Shroud of Turin was once called the image of Odessa, and before that, it was called the Mandelion. And so I bring all of that in this concept of multiple dimensions and life and death and consciousness and the quantum elements of it. And it makes for a really exciting story because there's assassinations and wars going on. And you get to go to Turkey and Istanbul and Rome and Venice and Assisi and Zurich and Malta. It's a lot of fun locations as well.
Nice. And then, so would you consider these books to be within the thriller genre?
Absolutely.
And so for you, Guy, what makes a good thriller?
It's got to have, for me, there are psychological thrillers, there are crime thrillers. Those don't tend to interest me as much. I'm always interested in the higher level thinking of science, politics, and religion. And so Dan Brown's a really good example. James Rawlings a really good example. Steve Berry, he's more history, but he really does a great example. Michael Crichton did a good example. These are all great examples of people who blend science, politics, and history in some level in their books. And so, but the thing about a thriller is you're going to have something happen, and you're going to make promises to the reader. You're going to answer that promise. You're going to give them that information, and they'll just stick with you throughout the book. So you have to have each book starting with some action. Each chapter starting with action, ending with a cliffhanger, pulling you through the story as you're going through multiple characters and multiple locations to build this more complex narrative. And you weave it all together and it comes together at the end to a satisfying ending. But it's the type of book that you really have a hard time putting down because you want to know what's going to happen next.
What's next, right?
If you can do it in a way where it's not just the science part or the danger part that you're worried about, but the character and the feelings and the relationships and the personal outcomes of those characters, if you can combine both, you've got a really good book.
So you really try to pull your audience in to be sympathetic with the characters and really get on their side. I'm sure there's probably some that they don't want to be on their side.
Well, yeah, you do have antagonists where you want to at least understand the antagonist. And I find actually antagonists to be the hardest to write because you want them just as fleshed out, just as real. Yes. You don't want them cartoon and two-dimensional. They have to have motives. They have to have dreams. They have to have strengths and weaknesses, and they have to have a fatal flaw that ultimately gets them. But so does the main character. So does the protagonist have fatal flaws. And their job is to always try to stay ahead of their own flaws and learn from their flaws, right? And so I definitely want my audience engaged with the characters because these are stories that the Snow Chronicles series, which started with Swarm, went to the last arc, is going to go into the Image. The same basic set of characters are flowing through them all, with just guest characters of antagonists and a few other guest characters within each book that are unique. but you have the basic set of characters. So you're watching these characters grow and change. One of the characters, whose name is Dr. Nelson Garrett, is based loosely on Sir Geoffrey Hinton, who's the godfather of machine learning and AI. And so they both basically have British accents, both very intellectual. They're not really into the whole use cases, but both of them are concerned. So I'm trying to kind of show different types of personalities dealing with these conflicts of politics and religion and AI power differently. And by having different types of characters experience the same things, but from different perspectives, it really opens it up in a great way to make it richer.
Excellent. And Guy, your series on AI and prophecy, does each book stand on its own, or do they complement each other?
Both.
Both? Okay. Yeah. So nice. So it's nice that you don't need to read one to read the other. And
I'll make enough references back to previous things that occurred so that you kind of get some continuity each time. But if you really want to get the journey of the characters and the story, you start with the first one you read through, and each one almost seems like a sequel to the next one.
Yeah, just an extension and going.
Hopefully stand on their own. So when I give a beta reader this latest book, they haven't read the other two books yet. So I said, does this have any plot holes? Is there anything you don't understand? Anything that hasn't been explained? Is this story seem complete in and of itself? But there are absolute references to the other two books and the key things that happened in the other two books that brought us to this point.
Excellent. I like that because it gives you the opportunity to, if you wanted to start with your newest book, you could start with it, but then you can go back and,
George Lucas started in the middle with Star Wars.
He sure did, didn't he? We know how that went. So, Guy, how many books have you written altogether? Do you know?
Well, the one for my son, two for my son, I guess, and then the 3 that I published, the one that I'm about to publish, that's 5, 6, and then I'm half complete on a nonfiction book called Prophecy Analytics, which describes the technology or the technique, the approach, and the conclusions that I reach using that technique. It's more of a backup to the other books, but it's the kind of book that only a few real prophecy nerds are going to read, and then they're all going to have their own opinion about what I got right and wrong.
Of course.
So that one was more of I should probably write this down than I'm excited to write this down.
Yeah.
The other books, the narrative books, are the ones that I get excited about and I get really obsessive with. I tend to be a workaholic anyway. I'll often get up in the morning. My first thing I do is boot up my computer and get my cup of coffee and my piece of toast. I boot up my computer. That computer won't go off till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Wow. Yeah. So you're really into it.
I'm inside the head of those characters and trying to solve, how am I going to, all thriller writers have the problem. Okay. I got them into this really great corner. How the hell am I going to get them out?
Yeah, right.
Man, maybe I shouldn't have made that one so tough. It's like, and you're walking basic time. How do I get him out? How do I get him out? So yeah, there's times when you're struggling with the story itself, but once it starts to work and you're just starting to really get that and it's polishing, I'll do a lot of research, a lot of planning up front. Usually takes me about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months to write the first draft. First drafts always suck.
That's what I've heard.
I will then go through and polish and edit and change and move things around and take things out and add new things. Most books take between 20 and Cortez was 50, but this one I'm on for the image, 31 drafts.
Wow. So it's a lot of work.
Get to something where I thought this connects, all the dots connect. If I make a promise here, I answer it there. The characters are working. Each character has its own arc. The story seems to fit. I don't have any plot holes. It takes a while to really get something that people will read and remember long after the last page.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, because if you're putting all this work into it, you want it to be something that people are going to remember and sit there and say, hey, when's Guy Morris coming out with his next one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do book signings all summer long. And so last year I didn't have a new book, and I had all kinds of people coming up saying, I bought your books last year. When's the new one coming out? And
of course.
Running late on that one. That one won't be out till next year. And so they're all, yeah, I'm really excited to have a new one to sell this year. But yeah, and it does take a while to figure out what these are about, and to also kind of align, figure out where the world's going. What's happening
Yeah.
in the world. Because sometimes I might think I might start with the story going in one direction, and then something happens, and I realize, no, this is the other direction is really where I really should be writing about.
Yeah,
And
that's got to be tough too, right? Because as you're developing your book and you're basing it off of wherever you started and what's going on in the world, and then all of a sudden something changes, and now you have to think to yourself, okay, am I going to keep going the way I am, or am I going to fold this in?
I could write a lot more books if I just wrote generic love stories.
Exactly.
Out a year, I'd be making a lot more money. But I'm not many people have the intellectual experiences in life and business, and the intellectual tools and the interest to kind of do this sort of higher level philosophical approach to a thriller. And I think because I can, I almost feel like I should.
Yeah, because not everybody
And
has the opportunity like you do, right? And I know, like you said, your first book, you did a lot of travel for that. And I know that right there off the bat would probably eliminate most people from doing that type of research. And you had the
exactly.
opportunity to do that.
For example, in Swarm, there's 2 or 3 chapters that are based in Hyderabad, India. When I was with Microsoft, I had a team in Hyderabad. So I went over there once or twice a year and met with the team and worked through problems. And in one time, they finally convinced me to take a day off, and they hired me a driver, and they drove me around the city and did tours in different parts of the city and the history and everything else. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous experience. But many of the characters and places that are featured in the book are based on things I went to, saw, experienced. And many of the characters that I worked with, I took their personality, kept their name, retweaked their personality and obviously their job, and then put them in the story as a fictional character. And so it's great when you can really pull from a rich bucket of characters and character types and looks and feels and the way they talk and the way they eat their food and the way they laugh and leer and all of these little tiny things that you pick up by meeting people around the world make for a more three-dimensional narrative with three-dimensional characters.
Yeah, it's almost like because you've lived the experiences and actually met these people, seen the different cultural situations, that you can bring that in as a firsthand experience and not necessarily just, oh, what I read online. You've actually lived it.
There's a scene in my next book in the Image where we're back to India. We're in Mumbai at this point, and Dr. Nelson Garrett is driving through basically from the airport to where they're supposed to be going. And some of the scenes that I write in that book are directly from my own impressions of driving through heavy trafficked areas in India, and the almost otherworldly experience that it was. I mean, we're talking about things like, cars constantly honking, elbow to elbow, motorcycles with a family of 4 bungee corded together on top of it, traffic stopping and going. Intersections were more like these giant swarms of iron bees honking and swarming each other going through. Traffic would stop at a heartbeat as random elephants and camels and cows would basically cross traffic and leaving their dung in the road. And then cars would be swarming around some old lady who had this old stick broom trying to sweep up the dung. And it was absolute insanity. I said, I've driven all over the world. I'm fine with driving. They said, no, you're not.
Exactly. Yeah, I've heard
you're right.
It is funny. I had an associate that I worked with. She was an amazing code writer that I worked with before. She was from India, and she told me when she first came over here to the U.S., how her and her husband found it very disconcerting that it was so quiet, because they were so used to noise being outside their apartment all the time in India and things like that. And they just got used to it. And when they got here, it was so quiet. They said for the first 2 months, we left the TV on all night so that we had, some background noise that we were used to. She's like, finally, we got used to it. She goes, but you don't understand how busy it is in India and how it does it. It's like it never stops.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, all of those experiences get to feed the books, but I do a lot of research. I'm trying to deal with the premises of, not many books have AI trying to create a black hole to prove a fifth dimension. And so I can combine the AI and the science and the politics and the humanity in a way that makes a multiple dimensional kind of book rather than it just being, oh, that's just a scientific sci-fi AI book.
Yep.
Right. I'm trying to intentionally avoid that pitfall and make something that's a little bit more universal to humanity.
Yeah, and from my feedback, from what I've seen in some of the blurbs and stuff that I've read from your books, is it really mixes that science, the AI sciencey part, plus the real world stuff, and then a little bit of fiction in there to kind of make it fun. Instead of just being like a textbook on AI, which, probably not many of us want to read, but when you put some good fiction and good character arcs in there, it makes it so much better. And not only that, but it helps us learn in a fun way.
Yeah. People don't really want to learn the details of the technology. They want to know the implications of the technology. Yes. What could go wrong? What could it do? And that's where you can just provide just enough of those details to provide some credibility or some hooks to things you need. But you're really trying to just tell a story about, let me tell you a story of how this could play out.
Yeah. Yep.
And as I said, there's a moral to it all. So it's not just a sci-fi or near sci-fi or a thriller. You really do care for these characters and see them going through some tough situations, and you want them to find the answers of what all this means, and it takes them several books to do so. So it's been an experience for me. I still think there's probably one or two more books in the series before I'm done. And then I'm going to go back to the Cortez and the Archie and all the ancient mysteries and all that kind of stuff that I'd love to explore. But I had to finish this one series out before I moved on because all the research, and it's too hard to go back and forth between.
Yeah, anytime you have to switch tasks just makes it that much more or less efficient. So
yeah, I was actually building a trailer for the new book, and I had worked on a trailer for the Cortez book last week. And in my head, I'm doing the trailer and I'm typing the script. And I'm using the Cortez name of the main character and instead of the current name. And it took me 3 times watching the trailer. I kept thinking, wait a minute, that's not his name.
It's funny.
So yeah, you have to be careful.
I want to ask you because you have, you've got a good background in tech and you have a good understanding of AI. So how do you, and obviously we're not going to hold you to this, but how do you see AI shaping our future at this point?
There are a lot of really great benefits of AI, and I've been involved in the industry for years. Technology has a way of coming up with some really products that really don't serve any really good purpose at all. There's going to be a lot of that. Mm-hmm. I think we're kind of at an AI kind of early where .com had the boom,
yes,
and then the bust. We're going to see an AI. We're already starting to see the bust, and I predicted that 3 years ago because the promise is going to move, and the eagerness of investors to cash in on this is going to move faster than the technology will. And there's going to be hundreds of different products coming out, many of which will fail in the marketplace. Yeah. And you'll start to get sort of a core baseline of where AI has the best benefits. I think one of the ones that are being demonstrated right now is in creative purposes. I have Photoshop, and I'm just learning to use the generative AI tool within Photoshop. And it's cool. I'd rather than trying to take an image where I have to buy the rights to create a character, I can give it a description of my book characters, and it comes back, and it's like, that's pretty darn close, So part of AI will be the transition for people to learn how to use it effectively without fear. We saw the same thing in the early 80s. When before computers were on every desktop, you had 3 in a company of 100,000 or
right.
6 in 100,000. I was one of those 6 trying to figure out a way to get everybody else more productive on them. And as you did, we saw a Wilshire Boulevard office suite, a full floor, a full block of Wilshire Boulevard, 350 accountants get whittled down to 30 who knew how to use the new tools. AI is going to bring that same level of economic disruption. So we're going to see recessions based on these AI layoffs. I don't see AI while there are dangers with AI, and I talk about them in my books, such as hallucination. For people who don't know, hallucination is when an AI bakes up something that sounds perfectly legitimate, but it's totally made up. And if you're not checking what the AI is telling you, you could be publishing or using completely made up information. The one that I write about the most is what we call emergent properties. And emergent properties is a tendency of an AI to teach itself something the architect never envisioned it would need to know. We don't know why it decided to learn that information, and we almost always learn by accident, but sometimes it's really powerful things like ChatGPT was recently caught lying. We've had AIs that learned how to read minds using MRA scans, AIs that learned how to hack into systems, AI that learned how to mimic somebody's identity. These are all emergent properties, and they're all the unknown risks that we can't predict. So there's risks with the technology, but my books will really tell you that the real risks that we have to worry about is what happens when we give this technology to a sociopathic billionaire.
Yes.
A corrupt fascist politician who will do anything to win and stay in power. A CEO who wants to beat out the competition and maybe regenerate some false information about that competition that looks real, and it can't be sorted out until it's done the damage. A warlord, a dictator, a crime lord, even religions can use this information to manipulate, deceive, and with AI agents, even cause real physical harm. And so the danger of the technology is not necessarily in the technology itself.
It's in the people that use it.
Will mimic our patterns. And just like we have lighter and darker angels, so will AI. And it's not that it's not a technology issue, it's a human issue.
It is a human issue. Yeah. And it's just like any technology that we've invented, throughout the last 100 years, right? There's always that risk that if it gets in the wrong hands, it could be used for the unintended purposes.
That's right.
Yep.
And we're seeing that today. There's a number of products sold on the dark web specifically designed to make malicious code. There's Darkbert, there's Evil GPT, Fraud GPT, Worm GPT, Election GPT. I think there's not Scorpion, there's Predator, which is a phone cracking hack tool that can basically install invisibly with a no-click hack text that sends to your phone through a Wi-Fi. You never even see the text. It basically installs the program. You never see it, but can copy everything on your phone doing and saying. These are already being sold prolifically on the dark web. And so there are criminals out there saying this is a new tool to scam people. And the best of us are going to, I'm pretty leery of most things, but even the best of us can sometimes be fooled in the right context. Our guard is down. We don't see it. Deep fake videos. We've seen examples.
Yeah, we've seen those already.
I'm your wife. They've got me. Go to the bank. And it sounds exactly like your wife until you stop and think for a minute. You call your wife's cell phone and you realize.
Yep.
And so there is going to be a price to pay. Aside the economics. Now, the economic side of it is that World Economic Forum, Trilateral Commission, Goldman Sachs, International Monetary Fund have all predicted that we're going to see somewhere around 40 to 50% of the workforce, global workforce, displaced between now and 2030. There is not a single country on earth prepared for that level of economic disruption, level of unemployment. And if you get that kind of unemployment, those are all the high-paying jobs that are basically pumping up our national budgets. You're going to get a huge budget deficit issue. Yeah. We have a financial crisis coming. There's demographics that are adding on top of that, and that's a whole separate issue to the AI. But all of these things together, in my next book, I call it the convergence. Now, political change, economic change, demographic change, AI change, it's all working together to basically create an environment that's going to be very difficult for the next several years. So AI is not necessarily to blame for that. It's how we want to use AI to lay people off and make extra 15 trillion in revenues, tool to transfer wealth to the oligarchy. And I'm not really a conspiracy guy. I'm an economist. I build macroeconomic models, but we do have an economy out of balance. And we do have too few people owning too much of the national wealth for it to be the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Well, excellent. Thank you for that take, Guy. Because it's the same thing with me. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on it. But you're absolutely right. I see the same thing. We are going to lose some jobs. I think some of those. I don't want to call them lower level because they're important, but like data entry type jobs and things like that. I think we're going to see those types of jobs as well go on the wayside, as well as even some of our tech jobs, because if we could teach AI to code, right?
Research lab technicians, research data technicians, middle-level managers, making decisions based on information. I bet within a few years, you'll see air traffic controlling,
Yeah.
train systems. You'll see a lot of our infrastructure run by AI. Again, if we don't have the protections in place, this is all very dangerous. If we have the protections, if we have the guardrails, if we have the testing, if we have the requirements, I'm fine with it. But if they're not in place, we're going to push this stuff to market too soon, and people will get hurt as a result. And we won't fix it. The attitude of most of the tech companies is it's too expensive to make sure we make it error-free, so we'll just fix the errors as they come up.
Yep, and you know that as well as I do from our backgrounds in tech, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah, that's really when it means your system might crash and you might lose some data, that's fine. When it means that the train might crash and you might lose people,
that's a big difference. Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I do want to switch gears a little bit because I want to be cognizant of your time. Hopefully, we're not going too long for you, but I wanted to ask you about the Author Event Network.
When I first published Swarm, I was getting rave reviews. I was being compared to Dan Brown and Michael Crichton and Robert Ludlum, and these were by major reviewers like Kirkus and Book Life and Book Trip. And I was excited, but my sales were mediocre, and I tried all kinds of online promotions. Now, they do say that most authors won't make money in their first book because they just don't have a big enough audience. And even if an audience loves your book and there's nothing else to follow up, you basically cripple yourself. So most authors don't make money till they've written 5 books or more. So I thought, well, but I was trying to promote the book and really unsatisfied with I'm a business guy. There was no rate of return. I would spend for every $100 on promotional expense, I got maybe $30 back in royalties. I said, well, that's not sustainable.
No, not at all.
Especially if I want to spend my money writing new books and producing new books. I stumbled onto I met a friend during COVID, but he went to these local fair called the Blackberry Festival. It's your typical community festival fair kind of thing where there's rides and food and vendors, right? There's T-shirts and jewelry and artwork and crafts and blah, 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 right? Well, he said, why don't you come down and we'll sell some books. I had just done a couple of Barnes and Nobles. I'd done really well, but Barnes and Noble was I'm like, when can I come back? And they said, well, when's your next book coming out?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to come back next week.
Yeah, exactly.
I want more books. So I went down there and I sold as many. It took me 2.5 days, but I sold more than I had at the Barnes and Noble. Different than the Barnes and Noble, where they bought at the wholesale and they marked it up, and I got the retail commission of maybe only a couple bucks per book, $2 or $3 per book. I went to the festival and I was buying at my print cost, selling at my retail cost, and pocketing all of it. And I made good money. And I realized, well, wait a minute. There's events and festivals and fairs all over Seattle all summer long from April through October, and then holiday markets. If I got other authors together and I was selective about the authors, so we're only bringing in good authors with good books and awards and high ratings and all that, if I could get really good, we could split the cost of the booth, bring our lower overhead really low. Our cost of entry becomes, $15 to $30 for half day, right? And you can sell a lot of books in that time frame and make a lot of money. And so if you can do it one weekend, why not go back the next weekend and the next weekend and the next weekend? So I started Author Event Network about 2.5, 3 years ago. The first year was just really trying to convince people to join and that this was a decent idea. Now we're up to about 55 members in a chapter in Seattle, a chapter in Portland.
Nice.
Our Seattle chapter is the busiest one. Our first event will start April 4th. Then we have an end of April event. And then starting the beginning, first weekend in May, we will be busy at least one day up to 4 or 5 days for every weekend through October, or mid-October rather. Then we'll have about 5 holiday events. I do about 60 to 70 book signing days per year.
Wow.
Through
That's
AEN.
a lot.
And knowing that I can sell all of those books with the highest margins possible, And those customers become repeat customers. So I had one event where a woman bought Swarm at one event. And then she came back a couple weeks later and saw me. She said, I love Swarm. I want to buy 2 more, one for my dad, one for my brother. And then she came back at the third time. She said, I love Swarm. What's your next book? And I gave her I gave her 2 more books.
Yeah.
So you start to build a relationship with your reader. They start to feel like they can ask the author whatever they want. And you're selling, now I'm not going to be at the New York Times bestseller, but it produces enough cash-free revenue, cash flow. It allows me to basically go out and hire designers and editors and proofers and beta and designers for the next book without having to dig into my savings, my own personal account.
And that really puts the sales into your corner too. Yeah, you get the idea, you get the freedom and the knowledge to know, I'm not waiting on a publishing company or I'm not waiting on a website. I'm doing it myself, so I can, in that aspect, you could kind of control. I don't want to say control because you never know who's going to buy, but you can control some of the sales of your book, maximize profits, and actually get out there and talk with your readers.
If I could get an agent coming in saying, yeah, I want to get your next book and we're going to take you international, we're going to get you in advance, and because we want you to put that money in advance and the really good, big, expensive promotions, to get you on the New York Times bestseller list and all that kind of stuff, I'd be open to it.
Yeah, of course.
I sent a copy of the latest book to an agent who had expressed interest in my other books. And that was almost 4 months ago. And they still haven't figured out whether they're interested or not.
Wow.
You know what? These books are timely. I've got readers waiting for the next book. If an agent's and I think the whole agent model is broken. They do a lot of Me Too. A lot of them are all the young adult, the young girl, female audience, or they're not, they're all basically selling the same kind of shit.
Yes.
And to find somebody unique and to find an author who's unique, who's got a long-term potential, they're just not investing in that. They're looking for people with big social media followings that they could try and take advantage of. So I've pretty much written off the whole traditional agency model. I still believe one of my books will get made into a movie at one point, and at that point, the floodgates will.
Well, that's usually how it happens, right? Is, it gets popular on its own, but then somebody's like, hey, I want to make a movie. And the next thing you know, gangbusters, and you're retired again.
Yeah. Well, I'll just keep writing books.
Just keep writing.
I think I mentioned this to you. I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. I do not sit around.
Right.
Well. I do not relax well. If I'm traveling, I've got to be doing something, seeing something, going someplace, learning something. And retirement for me is just the ability to stay super, super busy, but without the pressures of deadline and, performance metrics.
That's got to be a nice on its own, just the fact that you're writing a book and it's at your leisure, even though your leisure seems to be pretty quick. And but it's great because you don't have that nagging on the back. And that's one of the nice things too about you publishing yourself is that you don't have to worry about hitting a deadline for a publisher either.
I don't have to worry about taboo topics. If I want to take a book at Project 2025 in one of my books, I don't have somebody saying we don't want to do that because we don't want to turn anybody off. Or, if you can't quote this scripture here, make it more generic, make up a prophecy, generic prophecy, but don't quote something.
Yeah, for all the politically correct stuff.
What do you do? It's just trying to run down the middle with a mediocre book as opposed to just doing what I want to say the way I want to say it. Audiences are going to love it or they're not.
Exactly. And that's the way with everything, but I do love the way that you've just the way you explain the book, the researches that you do on your books, and, making fiction and real life events just come to life. That's amazing because I don't think there's not a lot of authors out there that do that really anymore,
Because it's really hard to do.
It is. I mean, just look at what you said.
I'm convinced you're smarter than me.
But look, I mean, your first book that you wrote for your son, right? Or the second book that took you, 12 years to write? Yeah. So, I mean, that was a long one, but I bet you...
Research.
Yeah.
You're right. It took me another 6 or 7 to figure out, okay, I've got all of this information that scanned the Mayan creation myth, the Younger Dryas event, the Inquisition, colonialization, the sack of Panama, the history of this island, boxes of information. And it was an effort to say, how do I do the Dan Brown thing and pull this into a modern story? where I'm uncovering these things. Who are my characters? How are they going to discover this? Pulling it into a single story where I could bring in the highlights of those things. That took a few trial and error.
Yeah, I have to imagine, because it's not like it's just something that's going to hit right off the bat, right? You had to kind of massage it to where you wanted it.
Yeah. And that sense of, I don't want to release something because I'm not under a deadline for a publishing company. I don't want to release something until I'm really happy with it. And I'm a perfectionist a-hole. And so it might take me a while to say, and I'll give it to beta readers and they say, I love it. And I said, it's not there yet, And because I had this sense of what I wanted to say, and it's not resonating in all the different frequencies and tones, then I'm just like, if it's only got 2 or 3 of the 4, it's got to go back till it fix it. And so it gives me the time to not only dive into what traditional publishing would say taboo topics, politics, religion, but it allows me to pull back and do so in a way that says, I'm not going to let it go until it's ready. And if it takes me an extra 6 months to get it ready, so be it.
So be it. Yeah, exactly. That's the life of retirement, right? As a writer. Yeah, exactly. I like that. So, Guy, is there anything else that you want to let the audience know about?
Well, there's a lot of people that are looking at the current times, and particularly when I look at prophecy, right? The first tendency of everybody, is fear. Oh my gosh, it's going to get really bad. If I'm just preaching economics, we're looks like we're in a tough time. If I'm just talking about geopolitics, it looks like we're going to see some tough times. We're just talking about climate, it's going to get worse. If we're just talking about AI, it's going to get worse. If I talk about prophecy, people go, ooh, don't want to talk about that. But by pulling them all together and drawing those conclusions that it looks like we're on a path of self-destruction that we may have been on before. The question that we get to ask ourselves, the first tendency of everyone is to be, don't want to talk about it, don't want to think about it, and are afraid of it. And I say, why? I'm 70 years old. I had the chance, and I've had chance. If I had a doctor, we have a friend who's dying of cancer right now. She's known for a while. And if I knew I was going to have a terminal disease, first off, I know that I have an expiration date. It's not a question of whether I do it or I don't, or even the question really isn't when or how. The question is, what am I going to do with what I've got while I've got it, right? I've got time now. That's the real issue. Not that something's going to happen and it might end sooner than I expect. The question is, what am I going to do until that happens? Who am I going to be until that happens? What legacy do I want to create until that happens? And having a doctor come in and say, hey, you've got a terminal disease. I can't do squat about it. You've got 7 years or 5 years or 3 years to get everything right in your life. Prophecy is a warning that we're reaching the point of this self-destruction process. And it's a warning for us to reprioritize. It's an opportunity for us to reprioritize. It's a chance for us to say, do you really need to be working that extra 80 hours? Do you need to work 80 versus 60 hours a week? Or maybe you need to take your wife and family on a vacation and enjoy some time together. Do you really need that extra house or that extra money in the bank account? Or do you need to take some time off and go see your kid play a game? Do you need to do some work in the garden? Do you need to take care of your health? Do you need to spend time in your spirituality? It's a time for us to rethink about what's really important and refocus on that. Because if we know from a statistical perspective that this existence that we're seeing is going to have some tough times, rather than fearing the tough times, embrace the good that you can have within that and focus on those things. I even tell people, we talk about Antichrist. Everyone says it's like really freaked out and said, forget it, man. He's just a dude. It's just another sign that says we're getting that much closer. That's all it is. And, if we looked at the suffering, we can look at all kinds of nations and countries that have gone through tough times in the past. We're just spoiled ass brats here in the U.S.
Really, we are.
If somebody doesn't like our coffee flavor, we think they're persecuting us. We're a bunch of wussies. But when you get past all that, you realize that this is an opportunity to reflect and reprioritize and to really bring meaning now into your life. And so as a result, my wife and I even though we're retired, we don't have a lot of money, we're finding a way to go do more world travel, because that's the thing that's special for us. is to get away just with us, no work, no other things, not even books, just to go someplace and eat new foods and drink wine and explore and take pictures and say, wow, look at that. Wow, look at that. And that's our special time. And so we've decided that rather than waiting, I said, I'm not getting any younger and I'm not getting any richer before I'm too old and too broke. We better go enjoy life. The prophecy piece comes into that and just makes that equation more acute. And so when people talk about, when people say I'm writing about these books, they're not written in a dystopic way. They're written in an intense way. They're a fast-paced way. There's definitely serious issues that I'm dealing with, but the characters always end on a positive note because we're looking for that meaning in the midst of the darkness, not to just pretend the darkness isn't there.
Yeah. And, you made a good point that time, that's the one thing that we cannot get back, right? We can get money back. We could get our house back, possibly job back, whatever. But time we can never get back. Once it's gone, it's gone. So we have to make the best of it, of the time that we have, and make sure that we get the most out of it, not just through our work, but through our lives and the individuals that we care about, whether it be a spouse, children, whatever. We need to take that time. And I think that's a great point that you brought up with these prophecies, is that it's not to get us afraid to not live. It's to get us an opportunity to live, knowing that this could come, and then making the most out of that time that we have.
And, I try in the latest book, I even try to draw the correlation between the Mayan and the Hindu. Both of them see life in cycles of creation and destruction. Now, the Hindus are a little bit more refined because I think it's a little older. And they have called the yugas, and they have 4 different yugas, and they start from rebirth, and they go to basically, we're in the Kali Yuga, which is sort of the self-destructive phase. And their whole premise is you can't have a rebirth unless you see a death. And so even if you didn't believe any of that, project 50 years into the future with climate, AI, population, autocratic regimes, control over our finances from cradle to grave, which is already existing today, pollution, all of the things that we can see, privacy, surveillance, police state, AI war, weapons of war, deadly lethal weapons. I'm afraid for my grandchildren. I have 7 grandchildren. And there's a part of me that feels like my generation failed them. I don't know that I failed them in particular, but my generation certainly did. Because we're the only generation to leave the world in a worse state than we inherited. And all the Gen Zs and the millennials are very resentful of the fact that, yeah, you guys all made lots of money on your homes, but now we can't afford squat. And they're right. There's a generational process here that's been going on. And if I look into their future, it doesn't look near as bright as I would really want my grandchildren to have. And some of it looks, some climate models predict that by 2045, parts of the Earth will be uninhabitable, which is going to create major migration issues, which is going to create major crime issues and major politic issues.
Immigration issues, everything, yep.
Food issues, food scarcity, water scarcity. There's almost a mercy in my head of thinking, yeah, we're probably due to just go ahead and unplug this one. Right. And let's let the rebirth process happen. See, you can't really say that because of all the people affected. Many people will die, many people will suffer. No one wants to see any of that. But at a higher level, I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing. I see it as a natural thing and just something that we should be aware of and prepared for.
Yeah, that's excellent take, Guy. I appreciate that and the insights that you gave there, because I think that's going to resonate with the audience for sure. I know it resonates with me, and it makes us think, what are we going to do to make our world collectively, a better place for future generations? Because if we stay on the same path that we're doing right now, we're just going to doom our future generations. So we have to do something. And I think no matter which side of the aisle you're on, whatever, I think everybody knows that whether you believe in climate change or not, we know that we have to take care of our environment, right? That's a given. We have to do better. We need to make things, more environmentally friendly. We need to use technology to the right things and, help save our planet. And like I said, I think you could get behind that.
I'm going to add to that if you'll let me. Having worked with like CEOs, CXOs of oil companies and tech companies and stuff like that. I saw the difference between that strategic global mentality of the business and how to move the business forward and the individual view of, well, we got to take care of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the boardroom when the chairman of the board of an oil company flew into a tirade because we were presenting our own studies by our own scientists to talk about the decreasing ice sheets in the North Atlantic and the Arctic and the increase in CO2 emissions from fossil fuels. He went into a tirade, basically didn't want to talk about it. We threatened to fire all of us if we ever talked about it again, never wanted to see this topic on his board again. Within 3 months, the key scientists on that project were fired. And, so I can see that when prophecy talks about the beast, it's really talking about that corporate governance banking network, interlocking network system that's overriding, that's basically has a more power than it should over the collective sum of the people who all want clean air, clean water, clean environment, enough food, enough money so that people aren't homeless. We need to take some of that money in the top and spread it around on the bottom. Many, many, many people, the people feel that way, but we've got the bifurcation between this beast system and the people under it. And I think that's one of the reasons prophecy is written that way. Is to give us a clue as to the fact that we're at odds with each other in terms of what our goals are for the world.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as you've seen, in the example with that CEO that didn't want to hear it, from the oil company, probably because it would cut into his profits, right?
Yeah.
And he's got a board.
He doesn't sell oil.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And he's got a board he's got to report to, and they're going to, ask him, why are you doing these studies instead of drilling more oil? So I understand, but there's at a point where we have to put people above profits.
Yes.
But
making that happen at all the major corporations and governments look at Elon Musk basically come out and trying to say empathy is our weakness. He's totally wrong, but it's indicative of the cancer at the top, right? Where my profits, growing money is what's important to them. Mm-hmm. The people are just things to get in the way. They either serve two purposes: to buy the products, or they're a cost to get rid of in the way. So while you and I and many, many, many of our friends can agree that there's human values that we have to reinforce at some point, the problem is there's no mechanism to make that an imperative at the top. And that's the beast system that will drive us into our destruction. And
into our demise. Yep.
We can't control that. I couldn't control it from the inside. They're sure as hell not going to be able to control it from the outside.
No, and as a little guy, as I say, as most of us are here in the world, we sit there and think that, what can I do about it? And I think that's that helplessness that we get because we see this happening. And it is frightening in the fact that, what can I do about it? Like you said,
we have responsibility for our own environment, our own choices. We have responsibility for the people we associate with the kind of dialogue we have, with the places we communicate and can have fellowship and community. We can influence all of those places, and we can influence how we vote. We can't control the beast, and that's just a given, but we can control ourselves in our lives and how we respond to that. And that in and of itself can define how others see us, right? Do we respond with joy and courage and hope and faith, even though we know it's going to be bad, but we can reap the good in the meantime? We don't have to be blind to the negative, but we have to be able to balance it in how we live our life. And that's what people will see as our testimony. And that's where we can make a difference. I'm not going to be able to change the world, but I see a homeless guy, I can help him.
Yeah.
If I know a kid down the street who's struggling with some addiction, I can go offer to help him. So there's things that we can do to make a positive difference. It just won't make a difference on the overall scheme of where we're going.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great insight, Guy. I appreciate that. So I know we're kind of getting at time here, and I want to be respectful of you. So what is your next project? What's the next book that's coming out, and when can our audience expect that?
The image is coming out, and the image will deal with CERN black hole to open up a portal to a fifth dimension. We're going to get a quantum signal from that dimension that's going to create some havoc around the world. But we're going to talk about the issues of how our own consciousness, the consciousness of machines, and the concept of faith all are quantum, have to do with quantum properties and how that properties, that quantum nature is the nature of communication between the dimensions. And we're going to talk about that from a consciousness, from machines, and from a faith perspective. We'll deal a little bit with the Great Reset banking initiative to basically replace the US dollar with a digital bank-owned digital currency, which is already in play. We'll look at the 2024 election and Project 2025 and the implications of that, and the sort of the back-end relationships to the Kremlin. And we'll look at the Shroud of Turin, which was the actual origins of the Shroud of Turin back in the 1st century when it was called the Mandy Line, and then the image of Edessa. And that'll kind of play into our kind of life and death, questions in philosophy that we'll get into. It will be exciting. You'll go all over the world, from Turkey to Istanbul to Rome, Venice, Assisi, Zurich, CERN, Malta. It'll be exciting tale, lots of high-tech adventure, lots of near-death misses, relationship issues between the two main characters, Den and Jen, who both are attracted to each other, both pushing each other away until they have to figure it out. Lots of really fun stuff going on. I think it's my most challenging one yet. We'll deal with many of the current things going on and put them in perspective, but in a very life-affirming kind of way.
And do you have a release date set for that yet?
I get it back from the 3rd round of editors on April 4th. I'll probably go through it myself another week or two to kind of do some last-minute tweaks. I need to give it to my formatter, so probably looking at mid to late May at the earliest. Okay. Maybe a little after that.
Excellent.
But I hate setting dates because I once and I missed it and everyone was upset, so I'm just saying it's coming soon.
Excellent.
But that allows me to make sure that I can just constant, even though it's gone through 3 rounds of editing, there's a part of me that says, well, I better read it again.
Yeah. Hey, and if that's your process and it's been working, might as well do it.
Yeah. So it's coming out really soon. And then I said, I have the nonfiction book that'll probably come out maybe later in the year.
Good.
And I'm already starting to plan out the next book in the series on top of that. And that'll take us into asteroid event and some other critical issues.
Awesome. Excellent. So you've got tons of stuff coming up. So nobody's going to have a problem finding new stuff from you. And you've got plenty of your, I don't want to call it old stuff, but stuff you've already written that's out there. This is
really done good. You guys could, anybody who hasn't read the stuff yet, this is really great books. You will compare us to Dan Brown and some of the other greats. But yeah, they're Swarm, The Last Ark, Curse of Cortez are all great books that are already out there, and would love to get those.
Excellent. And where's your favorite place to send folks to buy your books, Guy?
Well, you can go to Amazon and look up Guy Morris. That'll always get you started. Or you can go to GuyMorrisBooks.com. That's my website. And
Excellent.
There's trailers, there's fact versus fiction pages, there's highlights of reviews. If you want a signed copy, you can buy it directly from the website. My press reel and other stuff are there as well. So it's a rich environment. To get on my newsletter, I'm going to be offering my newsletter audience a 30% discount when the next book comes out. Excellent. So they can get a discount if they want to buy it directly from me and get it signed. So if you go to the site, you can sign up for the newsletter. I only send out about 2, maybe 3 letters a year because I hate spam, so I'm not going to spam you. So if you see a newsletter from me, it's because something new is going on. There is news. And as I said, you'll get all that extra information. For each page, for each book, there's links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble Online, Drafted Digital, other places for you to go to buy.
Excellent. So yeah, if you're listening, make sure you go and check out Guy's website, check out his books, buy 1, 2, 3, however many you want, and then look for his upcoming ones as well. And get on his newsletter, because I'm sure, Guy, you'll tell us in your newsletter when the new ones will be released, right?
Yes.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Guy, I think that's it. Unless we missed anything. Is there anything else?
Thank you so much. It's been a joy and a pleasure.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of stuff, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's all the time we've got for today on Just a Dude podcast. A big thank you to our guest, Guy Morris, for sharing such a fascinating insight into AI, prophecy, and the art of writing thrillers. We hope you've enjoyed the conversations as much as we did. Don't forget to check out Guy's books if you're looking for your next read. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Just search for Just a Dude podcast. If you've got questions, topics you want us to cover, or just want to say, hey, hit us up on social media or drop us an email. Remember, we're here to talk about what matters to you, the everyday dude or dudette. Until next time, keep being curious, stay grounded, and keep it real. We'll see you on the next episode.